Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you're joining us from today. I'd like to welcome you to Appsian's webinar on SAML 2.0 and Oracle eBusiness Suite. So some of the things that we're going to go over today, just from a brief introduction, is we'll talk about the evolution of single sign-on, talk about Oracle EBS SSO and integrating SAML into Oracle EBS. We'll also demo. Obviously, it's going to be a quick demo because single sign-on is always kind of a quick demo when it's a configuration. And we'll talk a little bit of some of the hints and tips, and we'll also do a Q&A. My name is Greg Wendt. I am the Executive Director of the Security Solutions here at Appsian, and just a quick brief intro. Coming up on about 25 years of ERP experience. I started in the late 90s when everybody was shifting off of the mainframe into the client server world, and yeah, now we're kind of going back to that mainframe with the cloud a little bit, but whole different story there. So when we talk about the webinar today, everybody is in a muted state so that we can actually communicate well. So if you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar control panel. It's typically on the right-hand side of your screen. You can submit questions that way, or you can submit a chat, whichever one you want to do. I'll be monitoring both of those during the session today. You can always email us at info@appsian.com as well, and we will be sure to follow up with you from that particular perspective. So when we talk about who Appsian is and why we're here talking with you today, what we do is we give organizations the ability to protect sensitive data inside of their applications. It could be over threats, insider users, all of those different types of things. What we have is security platforms that sit within the target application space. You can see that we're an Oracle partner, we're an SAP partner, so we have solutions within the SAP, PeopleSoft, and EBS space. We also have an A360 platform that allows us to have visibility into the transactions that are running and people are working with inside of these applications. So the area of single sign-on is really on the left-hand side there of the granular control and the integration of how we integrate with these target ERP systems. So when we're talking about EBS today, so it's going to be how we integrate with EBS and how we facilitate through our platform the ability to integrate with a SAML 2 provider. A little bit more about us, you can see on the right-hand side. Probably the biggest thing to call out is we used to be called Gray Heller. We rebranded in about 2018. And really what we do is we extend the ROI of your ERP systems without having to put in additional customizations. We do have over 250 customers worldwide. I think that's probably closer to actually over 300 worldwide. And you can see some of the names of the customers that we work with across the globe. All of those are utilizing some particular form of our security platforms or GRC platforms. And when you think about the different challenges that they have, single sign-on is really kind of consistent across the board when you're talking about wanting to solve a big challenge or issue for a lot of customers. And it's something, we'll obviously go into that today, but that's something that's very consistent across all of those different verticals, whether it's government, financial, healthcare, higher ed, or commercial, for example. It's a consistent problem that many organizations have, and it's not really it is a problem when you look at some of these legacy systems because they weren't designed to integrate seamlessly and nicely to all sorts of different authentication systems. It just wasn't what they thought about when these systems were built and designed. They were designed to process large amounts of data, do their core functionality, whether that's pay, do financials, expenses, whatever, manufacturing, whatever it happens to be. That's what these legacy systems and the ERP systems were really designed to do. So when we boil that back up and we think about why, what are the challenges that these organizations are faced with today? Definitely a remote workforce. If we think about the last 18 months to easily 18 months, many organizations have gone from complete on-prem to 90% or more, or even 100% of their employees being remote. So it's a giant shift in how people are accessing these applications, what they're working with, how they do their normal job. Which also has required a shift of form factors. Not everybody is accessing systems sitting at their desk in their cubicle in a corporate issued device, for example. So which really increases the exposure of how your system is accessed and what's able to be done inside of that system, all the different touch points. It's something that, working through my history, I remember we had a challenge where malware, just was sitting inside of so many different computers, and people would complain about performance. Well, the system's slow, and all of those types of challenges. And it's like, well, you installed, this particular extension and that extension on your browser, which then put all this different malware on your system, and all of those things, when you're talking about managing systems connecting into your particular application sets, when you don't control those systems as much anymore, it becomes a much larger challenge. So, some of the static access controls just really don't make sense. They were easy when I'm at my desk, I'm on the network, I'm connected to a wired network, I'm coming from a particular IP address. Maybe that IP, gets reused, maybe it doesn't, but pretty static access controls of how and when I'm going to be using the system. I'm not going to be coming in at night. I'm not going to be accessing it 2 or 3 in the morning. Why? Because I'm not on the network. I'm not at my desk. And really, it's the multiplication of enterprise apps as well. I mean, many of our customers, whether they may have a combination of a lot of these different ERP systems as a whole. So you could be seeing somebody with EBS, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, Workday, SAP. You can have a whole combination of all of these. And I was talking to a couple of different CIOs, and why I think we see that is, from a functionality perspective, those core ERPs still do a very good job of doing whatever they do. If I'm going to pay somebody, if I'm working on my financials, I'm working on my expenses, they do that really well. So what I want to do is maybe just extend some of the applications I may use. So maybe I have something for time entry, something very simple like that, or maybe it's benefits, and then it's going to feed back to my core ERP. But to make that seamless for a lot of the users, I want them to be able to interact between these two applications, even though maybe some are on-prem, some are in the cloud. I want them to be able to maneuver in and out of those applications. So that's what causes that uncoordinated security approach, and the multiplication of all of these applications really makes it difficult to have a cohesive approach on what you're doing from a security footprint. And that causes challenges, because once you get outside of the norm and it becomes a little bit harder to, one, repeat it. You have to do a lot of audits. There's lots of logging that has to take place. And you have a lot of issues with understanding where the problem may actually exist. So when we think about the different challenges that we're approaching because of some of the modernization challenges in like EBS, it is a holistic approach. And many organizations really want to move to single sign-on for a reason. One, it's a centralized system for identity trust. It makes it very easy to go to one particular location and turn on or off people's access. When you can trust that that particular identity store is actually the master of keeping user IDs, passwords, and all of those types of things, rather than having multiple, applications who might use the same login, which some organizations will call single sign-on. It's not really single sign-on. What I call that is shared credentials. There's a big difference between shared credentials and single sign-on. Single sign-on is truly utilizing an authentication that already exists to an identity provider, and then being able to move in and out of your target applications at will, because you have that trust already established with that central IDP. You're not having to put in the same user ID and password again. A great example is, okay, well, I log in on my computer, maybe I get access to my email and all of those types of things, but when I go out to the web, I'm going to have to put in my email, credentials to access Web Outlook, for example. Well, once I authenticate to that, I really should be able to move in and out of my applications. If I move over to EBS or if I move over to PeopleSoft, I shouldn't have to put in those same credentials again over and over and over and over again. And when you look at ERP systems, there's dev, test, stage, QA, production, numerous different systems that are running behind the scenes. And when you're talking about how to manage all of those different passwords into each and every one of those, it becomes a problem, and the ERP systems as a whole weren't designed to do security. They were designed to process data. So it's nice to have single sign-on within that, stored single repository. the IDP. It's important for that particular application to be at the source. It gives you a lot of extra controls and adaptive security with how users are working with the system. Lots of examples of why that's important. When we talk about centralizing that, it allows you to, one, have a single point for servicing all the credentials for a user. That kind of goes back to what I was just talking about with working through dev, test, stage, QA, and production, rather than having maybe 5, 10, 15 different passwords and user ID combinations for all of those different systems. You can actually have one, and that way, if somebody's going to leave the organization, if you need to terminate this particular employee, you can go turn it off at one spot. You don't have to go through and wait for a security administrator to go through and say, okay, dev's off, test off, QA has been turned off. That's a challenge, and it just creates a lot of redundant work, and really leaves open a security hole when you think about the time frame that it takes to go through those. Another very important factor really is a unified set of password policies and procedures. What are you going to do from the perspective of complex passwords? How are you going to do password reset? How often is it going to expire? Are you on a 30, 60, 90-day session? Those types of things. And then that kind of brings in the whole history and aging. How often can you reuse these passwords? It was one of those things, many people I knew that worked with ERP systems in the past. Oh, I need to change my password. Okay, I'm going to change it. And then I'm going to immediately change it right back to what it was. So they would have the same password for a year. Obviously, that's not what you want when you're looking at systems that have, full sets of production data, all sorts of risk for people accessing information like that. So it just doesn't work well. And that's one of the reasons why organizations want to move to a centralized identity provider and move to single sign-on. It's also going to reduce the amount of time that you're going to spend on your help desk or your service desk. You're not going to have to go through and reset passwords on all these different target systems. It becomes much easier to reset it in one spot. And it kind of is a first step to a passwordless, future. When we think about how single sign-on works as a whole, it's kind of a process flow. You're either going to have SP or IP initiated single sign-on. What that really means is if you've already got a session established with an identity provider, you can then go into the target applications, or if I don't have a session established with the identity provider, we're going to call out to that identity provider. It's going to go through that authentication request, come back to us, and it's going to return back to that user. They're going to be able to access the system. So the processing flow can work either way from our implementation, but it does utilize the standards of SAML 2 and allows you to work within the normal flows. When we think about how a lot of organizations try to get around a single sign-on integration, one of the things that you may see a lot of is trying to do a customization. Seems to be pretty common when maybe a customization that organizations work with might be Shibboleth, for example, because it's an open source solution, so there's a lower cost, option, but it kind of causes challenges. So pretty much you're going to have to either, go in and customize the front end of these systems to be able to communicate to the identity provider, which is going to cause customizations of the application itself. The other option probably that I see more of anything is maybe reverse proxies or gateways or agents that are either going to do some sort of screen scraping and then injecting the passwords into the target applications themselves, maybe through header values or something like that. It's not something that often works very well. And you also don't get the full featured suite of true single sign-on, because much of the functionality that you might be utilizing, say maybe like a deep link coming in from an email and a workflow that may have been a notification out to a user on an approval or asking for approval of a particular business process flow, things like that typically don't work. And it's also something with those reverse proxies that you have to worry about when you make changes to the target applications behind the scenes, or if you change something on your identity provider. So there's also extra infrastructure to maintain, and it becomes very challenging to figure out where the problem resides when there's maybe an issue with timeouts or challenges of getting users into the system consistently. So What we really have is a native SAML solution. And what we do is through our application security platform, we're going to communicate directly to the identity provider. So it's going to allow us to communicate out from EBS to the identity provider to request or verify that authorization, they've passed that authentication attempt, and they're going to be able to access the system. So nice part about it is we're going to be able to handle all of that for you. You're not going to have to customize your system. A little bit of configuration, and the support and maintenance is going to be included, coming from us as the vendor. When we look at our security platform for EBS, what happens is you're going to, the user itself is going to be accessing the system through, the browser or the client. And what we're going to do is we're sitting inside of the web server. Our supported releases for single sign-on, I want to go ahead and comment on this. You can actually see the release, kind of what we're working with up at the top right here on the platform is, 12.2.x. So when we're talking about some of the releases earlier than this, obviously there's a lot of difference in structure and architecture between these. So this is where we're working, so with single sign-on in that 12.2 experience. So we have our security platform that's going to sit within the web server to where we can actually do the communication and actually call out. We do have some other functionality available in EBS as well, but I'm just focusing on single sign-on today. So I figured what we do is jump into demo. So I'm just going to change my screen share here real quick. This is going to be a relatively quick demo because it's really, single sign-on in and of itself is, it's just that. It doesn't really regard, whether I'm demoing this in PeopleSoft or EBS. It's just kind of one of those things that's going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a URL, and that target URL is going to be a URL that's a deep embedded access point inside of the EBS system. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that up there. So what you can see is I'm hitting the EBS web server, and I'm making a request of a particular page inside of the system. So I'm going to walk through this a little bit first from the communication perspective and communication flow, just because what's going to happen is it's going to be very quick. So what's going to happen is we are going to, once I hit enter, we're going to go out and attempt to connect to EBS. What's going to happen is we're going to see that this is an unauthenticated request of the EBS system. So we're going to immediately then check with the configured identity provider. I've got this system configured with OKTA. So OKTA is going to check to see if this user has an authenticated session within OKTA. It's going to return back no in this scenario. And from that point, it's going to challenge me with my OKTA credentials. So user ID and password coming from OKTA. Once I supply those credentials and pass the OKTA validation, it's going to then come back and serve to me the page inside of EBS. So that's the process flow of what we're going through here. I wanted to kind of explain that to you very quickly because it is a very quick process of what's going to happen. So once I hit enter, you're going to see that I get prompted with OKTA. So now, since I don't have that session, I'm going to go ahead and put in my user ID and password for this. As you can tell, it probably takes me longer to put in my user ID and password. Once I do, it's going to sign us into the EBS system, and it's going to go ahead and bring up the browser. So now I can, go through. I've got the access. I can log in and do whatever I need to do at that particular point inside of EBS. And it's going to go ahead and launch out the application. So, as I said earlier, this is kind of a very streamlined, as are most of the single sign-on, demos and webinars. It's just, important to note that we're able to communicate with really any SAML 2 provider from that perspective. So it's just a configuration on our side to be able to communicate with maybe OKTA or ADFS, Azure, or something like that. It just has to be able to communicate on the SAML 2 protocols from that perspective. So I'm actually going to move back over to the PowerPoint at this particular point. And really, when we talk about tips for a successful SSO implementation, what we're looking for here, obviously what you're looking for is a seamless interaction with EBS. You want those end users to be able to maneuver in and out of the target applications and be able to get to their workflows as needed. This is what we're able to do. Going back to how how some of the other integrations, especially when you're looking at proxy servers or gateways or something like that, you don't have to have any additional hardware. We're going to sit within that EBS space as our architecture displayed, and you don't have to customize to build the SSO solution. So we're able to provide that for you out of the box to where you can, if you decide down the line that you want to change to a different identity provider, which actually happens quite frequently these days, it's something that you can just change your configuration and be able to communicate with the other one. Also, it is important for a full suite of performance that you're able to support the deep link navigation, because that allows the users really to have the full features of what they're looking for, being able to utilize and dive in and really take advantage of that single sign-on. And as I said, it really has that identity provider flexibility, and you don't have those additional carrying costs. So when you're looking at a return on investment, it's very fast, very quick, and it's not going to have ongoing hidden costs by going through custom solutions and customizations of the application. So it's going to allow you to stay current on your maintenance from EBS without having to spend a lot of time and extra money trying to support and go through testing of a custom solution with single sign-on. When we look at our implementations, there's all sorts of support. It really boils down to the implementation. You're not having to customize the system. You're not bringing in additional hardware. So, when you're talking about maintaining this, it really is stable tested. We've gone through this, and there is a fixed maintenance with fixed cost support structure behind it. Our support's available 24/7, and we update those particular, support with the things that are out there. So when you look at that on a custom side, obviously all of those things aren't going to be there from the support situation. So really, from the SSO perspective, I was kind of talking to our guys. I know we scheduled this for an hour, but when we're talking about demoing specifically, SSO, typically we get in and out of these in about a half hour. So it's something that we want to do quickly. We want to give you your time back. If you have any additional questions, if you want us to jump on a session for you specifically, you can email us at info@appsian.com. You can also, look us up on the web at appsiansecurity.com and request more information there. We've got a little chat bot that you can talk to with the team, and they can be able to answer any of your questions or set up additional calls for your team specifically. So, with that, I'm going to check the questions real quick, see if we've got any out there, and just call for questions, for the people who are on the call. But really, that's what we're talking about when it comes to single sign-on. Single sign-on should be straightforward. It should be efficient, and it should be something that you can do very quickly inside of an application. It shouldn't be something that takes in a massive amount of time to do. You want it to be efficient. You want it to be smooth, because in the end, that's what you want out of your customers, your target customers as well, is you want to be able to leverage that and give those that type of solution to your users. So with our solution, you can fold your EBS system into your, target security policies of utilizing single sign-on, regardless of what that identity provider might be. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for your time on the webinar today. And like I said, if you have any additional questions, you can email us at info@appsian.com or look us up on the web. And with that, I'll hope to look forward to seeing you on another webinar in the future. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.